I watched some videos about the Panasonic Lumix S5 Mark II and the S5ii, and it seems like a key takeaway from a lot of the videos is that this represents one of the, if not the best values for a full-frame camera for shooting video in 2023. And it's really hard to argue with that conclusion. But I wanted to throw out one possible monkey wrench in this whole idea of value and what represents good value and what doesn't. When a full-frame camera that has so many really great features and does so many things right comes in at a price that's lower than the competition, seems like that's going to be good value. There's one thing with this camera, though, that I'm not sure is being talked about. Maybe it is. I haven't watched all the videos, so if someone else has already kind of broached this subject, I'm sorry for being redundant. And that's the sensor itself. I guess from like everything that I've seen, everything that I've read and watched about this camera, this seems like it's the same sensor that was introduced in the Sony a7 III back in 2018. I know a lot of the videos have said that this is a new sensor. I don't think it is, and I don't know that Panasonic is really claiming that it's a new sensor. If you go to the website and look at, the S5 II announcement and everything, they say it's an upgraded sensor. And if you read about what the upgrades are, really what they're talking about is the addition of phase detect autofocus points on the sensor, but they don't really, mention any other like real upgrades or innovations to the sensor itself. And I'll link some articles in the description, but it seems like Panasonic got out of the sensor manufacturing business and its like semiconductor business altogether back in like 2019. Since then has been purchasing sensors from other manufacturers. You might rebut and say, well, it's got dual native ISOs, whereas the a7 III didn't. I kind of think that this whole dual native ISO thing has more to do with software and maybe the processing of each camera, which can be different, obviously, depending on the manufacturer than it does with the sensor itself. Because even with the a7S III, Sony didn't say anything about this having dual native ISO either until it came out that, some of the reviewers were saying, oh, well, if you go through the ISO range and look at the noise pattern, once you get to ISO whatever, the noise pattern cleans up. And then Sony was saying, yeah, it's kind of a dual native ISO, but they didn't really say it was. All that spiel out of the way, does it matter? If it is in fact the same maybe slightly upgraded sensor that's been around since 2018, does that matter at all? Well, probably not. It doesn't seem as if the majority of improvements to sensor technology in the last 5 years, or even the last 10 years, have really been in image quality. Of course, there's been increases in megapixel counts. Dynamic range tends to increase like incrementally at best, I think. There's a video that Manny Ortiz put out just a couple weeks ago comparing the original Sony a7R, which was a 2013 release, I believe, against, I think it was the a7R5, so like a 10-year gap between those two cameras. And he showed, example photos and whatnot, raw photographs. Of course, there's some improvements, higher megapixels, etc., but there's not as much of a difference between the a7R original versus the latest a7R5 in terms of just raw image quality. I think where more improvements have been made in sensors is just faster readouts, stack sensors, like all those technologies that help the camera read the image faster off the sensor. And in this category of cameras where the S5 Mark II is sitting, $2,000 to $2,500 range, you don't tend to see really fast sensors anyway. Its direct competitors, I think, are the Sony a7 IV, which I'm filming this on, which has a very slow readout of its sensor, and then the Canon R6 Mark II. And that camera has a slightly faster sensor, but it's not like exponentially faster. It's not like a7S III fast or A1 fast. And I'm not saying that Panasonic is trying to pull a fast one. It's like, it's in the name, right? This is a Mark II of an existing camera. It's not an all-new camera. And I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree with me, or if you do agree, does it even matter to you? If you did agree and think, yeah, that's kind of bullshit, that's a 5-year-old sensor, but if you compare it to the a7 IV, what is better about the a7 IV sensor than the a7 III sensor? It has more megapixels, so it went from 24 to like 33. If you compare side by side, the differences are pretty negligible. So all that said, if it were me, if I were buying a new full-frame camera right now, if I were starting from scratch, I didn't have one, or I was willing to invest in a new system, and the options are S5 II or the S5 II, the Sony a7 IV, or the Canon R6 Mark II, I would probably go with the S5 Mark II X. I also might wait and find out what else is coming down the pipeline from Panasonic. Their other cameras are well past their sell-by date in terms of needing an update. So the S1 and the S1H are older than the S5. Whether they're going to get a Mark II or whether there's an all-new sensor, all new features coming down the pipeline, I don't know. I would guess that it's not going to be too much longer before we hear something about those as well. It might not even matter because maybe $2,200 is the cap, in which case, you know, the S5 II is probably the best bet. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. Is this an actual issue, or am I making a mountain out of a molehill and nobody really cares? Or do you think I'm completely wrong? Do you think this is a new sensor? It's not the same one that's been in use since 2018 in the Sony a7 III. Let me know why you think that. Give me some data. Give me some articles or something. But I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I'm willing to be wrong, but I would love to know why you think so. Anyway, appreciate you watching the video, and see you later.